what time zone you're in? Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
I'm Assad, an assistant professor of sociology here at Stanford, and welcome to the Center for Latin American Studies Friday lecture. Yay! Before I introduce today's speaker, because I had to duck out a little early today, I wanted to take a moment to preview next week's speaker, Andrew Smolsky, who is a professor in agricultural economics, sociology, and education at Penn State. And his talk next week will be on the varieties of rifts across Cuban agriculture's long durée. So make sure you stick around for that next week. Come back and enjoy. But today, we, and especially me, are very pleased to welcome Mayra Feddersen to class. Mayra is an associate professor of law at Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez in Santiago, Chile. And Mayra is one of our 2025-2026 Luxich scholars, and will be presenting a paper called Immigration Regimes and Labor Market Integration, the Case of South American Immigrants to Chile. Now, Mayra is no stranger to the Bay Area. She earned her PhD and master's degree from the Jurisprudence and Social Policy program from UC Berkeley Law School. And her research focuses on immigration policy, immigrant labor integration, and socio-legal studies, particularly on formal institutions, but also more generally on a range of institutions that I've been lucky to work with her on. She's very much what I would like to call an energizer bunny when it comes to her contributions to her field, both domestically and internationally. I don't know how she does it, but she is one of the principal researchers within the Migra Millennium Nuclear Cluster in Chile. She's the deputy director of the Centro de Investigación en Derecho y Sociedad at her university. And if that's not enough, Mayra is also president of the Centro de Políticas Migratorias. So it's like, well, how do you do all that? I don't know the answer. And finally, on a more personal note, I just want to say that Mayra does all of this with such a calm demeanor in her interactions with others. She is smart, she's generous, and above all, she's quietly cool. So please join me in welcoming Mayra to class.
Thank you, Assad. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be presenting this work today. Before I begin, I would like to thank Assad for his warm introduction, and also the Center for Latin American Studies for the invitation to be here for 4 months. Elizabeth, Molly, Samantha, Joaquin Emiliano, Hector, the class master students, and my fellow visiting scholars. Today, I want to argue that increasing immigration regimes worldwide raise pressing questions about whether and how the assemblage of law, policies, and regulations that compose these regimes shape immigrants' labor integration. This work is focused particularly on labor market integration because it's one of the central drivers of immigration and a key marker of successful integration into society. So let me set the background. Across the global north, countries have increasingly restricted immigrants' access to legal status, limiting their opportunities and to live and work. This reality is not exclusive to Europe or the Americas. Similar dynamics are now evident in the global south, which has historically received most of the immigrants' population from neighboring countries, which more recently, in 2005, had embraced inclusive and progressive policies. However, starting around 2018, South American countries have increasingly enacted and implemented more restrictive policies, emulating their northern counterparts. In fewer than 2 years, and in fewer than 2 decades, Chile went from under 1% to nearly 9% foreign born, one of the fastest demographic transformation in the region. This shift started in 2010 and accelerated dramatically with the onset of the Venezuelan displacement beginning in 2017. By 2024, over 1.5 million people living in Chile have been born abroad, a growth rate that surpassed even some of the most established destination countries in the world. This rapid transformation set the political stage for the immigration reform that is the center of our analysis. The three groups we focus on, Colombians, Peruvians, and Venezuelans, together account for nearly 62% of all immigrants in the country. As we will show, their experiences are shaped by their individual characteristics and the evolving immigration regimes that they navigate. So why does Chile represent a case of regime retrenchment? This slide traces the sequence of policy changes and their consequences. Three shifts are particularly important. First, the elimination of in-country status adjustment. During the previous immigration law, a tourist visa combined with a work contract provide a widely used pathway for migrants to adjust their status and obtain temporary residence. The immigration law passed in 2021 and implemented in 2022 dismantled this pathway. According to this new legal framework, applications now have to be filled abroad. An in-country adjustment on tourist visa was abolished. The law also eliminated a special temporary visa that was created particularly for Venezuelans and ratified existing consular visa requirements. And this comes to our second important policy shift, the expansion of consular visa requirements. As a mechanism to control entry, the Chilean government began imposing consular visa requirements on specific nationalities. Under the previous legal framework, only Dominican nationals were subject to this requirement. But in June 2019, the government extended it to Venezuelan nationals. With an approval rate of less than 50%, it prompted Venezuelans to enter through irregular channels. Further tightening also came with the 2024 amendment of the Refugee Act, which introduced new eligibility criteria. Asylum seekers now must apply within 7 days of entry to the country. In the United States, it's 1 year. In Chile now, it's 7 days. And are barred from applying if they have stayed in a third country for more than 60 years. And the last shift is the expansion of internal and border controls. Despite being less than 3 years old, the immigration law has been amended multiple times. Key modifications include measures to facilitate deportation, to extend detention periods for undocumented migrants, and a provision allowing the summary removal of migrants apprehended within 10 kilometers of the border. The consequences were immediate and dramatic, as you can see. The estimated undocumented population grew from 10,000 in 2018 to over 336,000 by 2023, the vast majority of Venezuelan origin. So given this context, the central question driving our research is how do newly restrictive immigration regimes shape immigrants' labor market integration? This is an important question because prior theories of labor market integration have generally treated immigration regime as stable backgrounds conditions rather than as dynamic forces in their own right. So before presenting the findings, I will briefly map the theoretical landscape. Two main traditions explain labor market inequalities between immigrants and native-born workers. The first, the group-level theories rooted in assimilation framework, focuses on what migrants bring with them and accumulate over time. Education, social networks, civil society ties, and post-country experiences. The core prediction is gradual, unidirectional improvement. Over time, immigrants close the gap with natives and they reach parity. The second tradition, the structural theories, locates the source of inequality not in immigrants themselves, but in the bureaucratic, institutional, and organizational context in which they seek work. From this perspective, inequality reflects how institutions and organizations sort and constrain immigrant workers, regardless of the resources they bring with them. Both traditions offer compelling accounts, yet they share a common blind spot. They treat immigration regimes, as I was defining the assemblage of law, administrative rules, and enforcement practices that structure cross-border movement, assign legal categories, and mediate access to rights and resources as largely stable and latent background conditions. We argue that this shared assumption helps explain why these two perspectives are often seen as incompatible. Those skeptical of structural accounts argue that they are overly deterministic and that migrants can navigate and defy the structural constraint. Those skeptical of group-level theories account that they overstate immigrants' ability to overcome very real structural barriers. Our central argument is that group-level and structural perspectives are compatible if we bring immigration regimes at the forefront. When regimes shift, tightening or relaxing rules governing movement, legal categorization, and access to rights and resources, they reshape the conditions under which both individual resources and structural forces operate. So, for example, pre-immigration characteristically undoubtedly shape integration trajectories, but immigration regimes mediate this relationship by configuring the very categories into which migrants are sorted. The meaning of pre-immigration characteristics for labor market outcome, in short, depends on the regime in place. Similar structural explanations, the role of institutions, employers, and organizations, do not operate independently of the regime in place. Regimes conditions the degree to which structural barriers constrain or enable immigrants' labor market trajectories. And together, this insight led us to theorize two mechanisms through which restrictive regimes produce labor market integration. One is recategorization, which I will explain in more detail with the findings, but just for you to know, it's when eligibility criteria shift, immigrants who would have achieved legal status under the prior rules are now channeled into irregularity, and hypersegmentation. Under a restrictive regime, even well-credentialed migrants are confined to precarious secondary labor market position. The hyper prefix signals not the circulation within the labor market, but the lock-in at the bottom, particularly due to the immigration regime that makes them impossible for migrants to obtain legal status. I will explain this separately in a minute. So how did we study this? We follow a sequential mixed method design. We start with survey data on using CASEN. CASEN is a national representative cross-sectional household survey conducted by the Ministry of Social Development in Chile every 2 years. So we analyzed CASEN from 2017 to 2022. There was in between COVID, as you know, so the 2019 CASEN did not follow the same methodology than the regular ones. So that's why we only chose the ones that had the same methodology, so 2017 and 2022. Okay, the 2019 was like a smaller survey. So we use this survey to identify the patterns. So who is integrating, who is falling behind, and whether standard explanations account for what we can observe. Given the results of the quantitative analysis, we then conducted in-depth interviews. The qualitative work, we pursue qualitative work to help us unpack the how and why behind the patterns that we found in the survey questions and responses. So we conducted 69 interviews between April and December 2023 in Chile with respondents for different legal status, from clandestine, overstayers, temporary, and permanent residents. And now the find. So what did we find? Before going into the findings, let me give you a brief sense of who we are studying. So who are these Colombian, Peruvian, and Venezuelan migrants? So this is a simplified table because the other was too detailed and impossible for the people that is at the end of the room to see. So the idea here is to compare Chileans with my three groups, Colombian, Peruvians, and Venezuelans. And so you can see in 2017, this part, the three immigrant groups share several common traits relative to Chileans. Considerably younger, equally likely to be women, less likely to identify as indigenous, and more likely to be married. But there are also meaningful differences across this group. In terms of education, Colombians and Venezuelans are actually more likely than Chileans to hold a college degree, while Peruvians are slightly less likely. Household composition also varies. Colombians and Venezuelans tend to live in smaller households, while Peruvians live in larger ones. By 2022, the overall portrait looks similar, but three things have changed. Household size have grew across all immigrant groups. The likelihood of being a parent converged across nationalities, and all three immigrant groups have accumulated more time in Chile. Okay, so what did we find? Our approach proceeds first to determine labor market outcomes between each immigrant groups and Chileans. We estimate a series of regression models using national origin as the key variable of interest. We did this separately for 2017 and 2022. Our approach proceeds in steps. We started with an unadjusted model, no controls, then add a full set of demographic characteristics as our baseline. We then sequentially introduce three explanatory factors: network ties, civil society ties, and region of residence, before estimating a final model that includes all three together. This step-by-step approach allows us to assess how much each factor accounts for the gaps we observe between immigrant groups and Chileans. So what do we find? This figure shows regression results for two outcomes: employment and household. The top panel, 2017 here, confirmed that many of the descriptive patterns hold after adjusting for controls. For employment, immigrants' advantage over Chileans persists across all models, with network ties largely accounting for the observed differences. For household income, the picture is more nuanced. Once sociodemographic factors are considered here, Venezuelans earn significantly less than Chileans on average, and this gap widens after accounting for the other explanatory variables. So in 2017, Venezuelans are doing worse compared to Chileans and the other nationalities. In short, in 2017, network ties drove employment advantages, here, job reference, while selectivity based on demographic characteristics shaped income disparities. But look at what happened in 2022. There is a complete different story. Immigrants still show higher employment rates. These are immigrants. They have a higher employment rate compared to Chileans, the red points. But household income, even though they work more, if you look at the income here, it's significantly lower for all immigrant groups. Chileans are here in 2022, and Chileans they're working less and they're earning, so they found a magic bullet they found something to work less and earn more. But immigrants, Venezuelan, Colombians, and Peruvian are earning significantly less. So this is central too, and we can see here something happened between 2017 and 2022 that cannot be explained neither by demographic, network ties, civil society ties, and region of residence. So this figure examines the same labor disintegration by turning to permanent work rate and written contract rate. In 2017, the three immigrant groups and Chilean report similar rates in both outcomes. By 2022, immigrants are more likely to report holding work, a permanent work, but compared to Chileans, they are more likely they don't have a written contract yet. So Chileans have a higher rate of written contract compared to South American immigrants, which suggests that immigrants are exposed to precarious employment to a higher degree than Chileans in 2022. And this figure presents the results for multidimensional poverty. In 2017, the models generally show no significant difference among the different groups. But in 2022, however, poverty rates are substantially higher across all immigrant groups. Again, you can see the difference between the red, who are the Chileans, and all the immigrant groups who are here. And none of the key independent variables helps explain this outcome. So taken together, analysis of 2017 and 2022 CASEN results point to a trajectory, we believe, of labor market disintegration for South American immigrants in Chile. Despite parity or advantage relative to Chileans in 2017, by 2022, immigrants disproportionately have lower income, written contract rates, as well as higher poverty rates. This pattern persists even after accounting for sociodemographic factors, network ties, civil society ties, and regional differences. This temporal shift points away from group-level explanations of labor market inequalities and towards structural ones, raising the question of how legal policy and regulatory changes in the intervening years may be undermining immigrants' labor market integration. In our qualitative analysis, as I said previously, we find two mechanisms that explain why immigrants are doing poorly in 2022 compared to 2017: recategorization and hypersegmentation. Recategorization first. So legal status is often considered as something fixed, something that is determined by how you enter to the country. But our analysis shows that legal status is a product of the immigration regime in place. The same person who would have become a legal resident under the old rules, now it will become undocumented under the new ones. Not because anything about them changed, not because they had different demographic characteristics, but because the law changed. Let me show you how the pathway before and after the 2022 legal reform. This slide shows how recategorization worked in Chile before and after February 2022, where the immigration law started to take effect. Before the reform, someone enters on a tourist visa, finds work, and gets a contract. And that contract is the base then for applying to temporary residence and then to get permanent residence. This was a well-known path and widely used. After the reform, the same sequence of events leads nowhere. You can enter on a tourist visa, but you can get a work contract. But that contract no longer creates a path to legal status. If you overstay, you must leave Chile to apply for a visa from abroad. And most immigrants, they do not leave Chile because they do not have the means to leave or because they have informal jobs in Chile. So the result is people who would have been on a path to legal permanent to residence under the old regime are now stuck. Not because of anything they did differently, but because the rule changes. So this is Wanda is a Peruvian national who had first visited Chile in 2013 to see her father. She returned in 2022 with her husband, unaware that the immigration law had changed. Wanda account captures the core dynamic of recategorization, the same immigration project that would have led her to a legal status a few years later left her undocumented. Not because she was different, but because the law was different. Without papers, both she and her husband have struggled to find formal work. As she told us, my husband has gone looking for work, but employers keep asking him to prove that he can work lawfully. Many places won't hire him, so I have been working at the street market. This is a pattern we heard across dozens of interviews. The transition from tourist visa overstayer to legal resident, which had been a common pathway, was effectively closed after February 22. Visa overstayers under the new immigration regime described frustration akin to those reported by clandestine entrants. David, who migrated from Colombia in 2022, and entered with a tourist visa that he overstayed, recalled how his mother urged him to accept a work contract so that you can get papers. She heard of this possibility from previous migrants, but David soon discovered it no longer applied. As you can see in the slide, he looked into it, and in the end, having a work contract won't help me get papers because it doesn't work that way anymore. Even though he was offered a construction contract, David declined. In his telling, he did not see the value of a contract that tethered him to one employer. With the new law, the contract won't help me legally. The second mechanism is hypersegmentation. So labor market segmentation, which means that immigrants are ending up in lower quality secondary labor market jobs, is well established. Our contribution is the hyperpart. Under the prior regime, secondary labor market jobs were a stepping stone. Immigrants work in construction, cleaning, call centers, but they were a path. As they gained legal status, they could move into better jobs. After the 2022 reform, this was no longer possible. 25 of our 29 respondents who entered before 2022 made this transition to tourist, to temporal, and then to permanent. Under the new regime, the starting position was the final destination. The same jobs, same low wages, same precarious conditions, but now without any legal path to move up. None of the 8 respondents who entered after February 22 had made this transition at the time of our interviews. The key insight here is that legal status is the gateway to the primary labor market. When the pathway to legal status closes, the pathway out of the secondary labor market closes too. Kimberly is a Colombian lawyer specializing in administrative law, like myself. She migrated to Chile after the COVID-19 pandemic stalled her legal practice. She tells me the story. The process was easy for me, she recalled. My boss lent me some money, and since my password was up to date and everything, it was really simple to enter. Once in Chile, she began working with her aunt selling real estate. Then later found a position managing the administrative side of a local retail business. With that job contract in hand, Kimberly submitted her visa application just before the new immigration law took in effect. In fact, 9 days before the immigration law took effect. So with the transition from a tourist visa to a temporary and eventually to a permanent resident, she brought a sense of stability and satisfaction to her life. She's speaking about her work. She said, I love the location, the schedule, and my boss isn't constantly checking on me. They give me a lunch subsidy and a bonus on top of my salary. They respect my weekends and don't contact me then. Honestly, it's been very good. Only presenting her applications 9 days before the law went into effect. A second example is Walter. Walter is a Colombian man who entered Chile in 2021 and whose tourist visas expired after the legal reform occurred, leaving him undocumented. Walter's account captured the power dynamics of hypersegmentation. Without legal status, he lacks bargaining power. Employers know this and use it. They demand extra hours, withhold compensation, and justify giving him work as a favor. This is the condition that recategorization creates. By locking immigrants out of legal status, the immigration regime simultaneously locks them into the most exploitable positions in the labor market. Lastly, Carla is an illustrative example of what could happen if someone does not have a path to regularities. Carla is a Colombian national who entered in Chile on a tourist visa in 2022 and later overstayed, as the other examples. One of her first job was a caregiver for older adults. Since she lacked legal status and could not adjust it under the new immigration regime, the clinic offered her irregular shifts. One day yes, 1 week no, making it impossible for her to maintain a stable income. Seeking steadier work, Carla accepted the position as a clerk at the neighborhood mini market owned by her landlords. Her new job involves longer days, 11 to 12 hours with unpaid hour-long lunch break, a more physically demanding task, from serving customers, cleaning, to receiving deliveries and restocking shops. Yet, the position from her perspective, provides a consistent income and proximity to home. She lives her house is at the top, like the mini market, and then on the second floor is her house. So she has the time to check on her young son during the day. But she still lacks a written contract, it's paid in cash, and receives no social security contributions. So she might feel that she's a little bit better, but she's still working without irregular. And this recategorization and hypersegmentations, these two mechanisms are in the case of Venezuelans are even more acute. Before 2019, Venezuelan migrants to Chile migrated to Chile similarly to Colombians and Peruvians, relatively easy entry, accessible regularization pathways. But in 2019, the government introduced a consular visa requirement specifically for Venezuelans in response to the political and economic crisis. Many who could not obtain visas entered clandestinely, and under Chilean law, clandestine entrants face even higher barriers to regularization than overseas. Then in 2022, when the law, the full reform took into effect, then the law removed all the remaining pathways. So this is the example of one illustrate this compounded exclusion at its most acute. A lawyer, again a lawyer, I think lawyers for some reason we should expect lawyers, because of their credentials, to do better, because they have the resources to and the skills, the education to do better. But as you can see, it's not something that depends solely on their individual characteristic of the person. The legal status, recategorization, and hypersegmentation play a prominent role. So Juan, he had 7 years of experience in Venezuela. He had his own business. He was heading a civil registry office, but he was denied a consular visa abroad. And in the interview, he explains he cannot understand why they rejected his visa application, because he had like a good work, he did not have a criminal record and a renewed career. But since he could not travel regularly to Chile with a consular visa, he entered irregularly without border inspection. And so now he cannot, at the time of the interview, he was working as a night doorman on weekends and as a janitor on weekdays. So this, you can see here that this job that could have been a starting point to her life until he was able to get a legal status becomes the final destination. So credentials that like his individual credentials that would normally have conferred him labor market advantages are becoming irrelevant when legal precarity overrides everything else. So Esteban faces a similar story than Juan. After entering Chile before, Esteban cycled through a series of jobs: dishwasher, caregiver, market labor, before obtaining work as a picker in a supermarket, where he used the identification number of a Chilean citizen to secure a fixed-term contract. Obviously, as you can say, because of the condition I was in, using someone else's identification number, I would never get promoted, he explained. I just had to go and do my work, almost not even talk to anyone. You could not stand out for anything. So let me summarize our three main contributions. First, immigration law is labor law. This might sound obvious, but it's underappreciated in both immigration scholarship and labor scholarship. The rules governing who can enter, who can stay, and what legal status they hold determine labor market access as much as the employer decision or the worker characteristic. Second, integration is neither linear nor irreversible. Dominant theories present a picture of gradual progress. Our findings show that when immigration regimes change, that progress can reverse quickly and dramatically. within just a few years. And third, we need a broader framework for measuring integration. Employment rates can look fine even when workers lack contracts, face wage debt, and live in poverty. The labor market experience of immigrants under restrictive regimes may not show in headlines employment statistics, but it shows up clearly in poverty, contracts, and working conditions. To conclude, immigration regimes are not just a background condition for immigrant integration. They are active determinants of labor market trajectories. Chile's case shows that integration is reversible. Within just a few years, a population that was integrating well, as you could see in 2017 data, started deteriorating. These dynamics are not unique to Chile. Across the global north and south, immigration regimes are becoming more restrictive. Our framework offers tools to understand and anticipate the labor market consequences of these changes. So thank you for your attention, and thank you again to the Center for Latin American Studies for the invitation. I will be very happy to discuss any aspect of this work, and also to get the conversation started, I included some questions, but I also have other questions here from the master students that I can, and also if you would like, I can speak if there is interest on a follow-up project that we are doing with Assad about how do restrictive versus inclusive immigration regimes shape immigrants' willingness to claim and exercise labor rights. Thank you very much. Okay. So how should I take it?
You can start if you want with the student questions.
Okay. So yeah, is at the order it has a, because I don't want to be unfair. And so Diana, for example, asked, the paper mentions an employer told Daniela a work contract will still give her a visa even though that wasn't true under the new law. Do you think employers actually did not know, or were they using it to take advantage of people who had no other options? Well, it's sometimes employers don't necessarily know the law, but in Chile, the way it works, there is a kind of division between what is labor law and what is immigration. So sometimes employers, they follow the labor law, because in Chile, regardless of your legal status, you have to have, you are protected by labor law. And so they draft work contracts for immigrants, but those contracts put them in a position to be then fined or according to immigration. But they still prefer to some of the employers, they prefer to cover them under labor law, regardless of what they can do about immigration. So, but there is variety of responses. Some employers will not draft any sort of contract because they, in a way, they take advantage of the irregularity of migrants, and or they have them sign like temporal contracts that they change every month. So there is, of course, some taking advantage of them, but for migrants, the reason why they seek to have work contracts was that before, with the previous law, you could use that contract and show that you had made efforts to be a good citizen in a way, and that you had ties with the country because you were working, you were contributing economically to the country, you were paying taxes. And even though you knew that you were not complying with the immigration law, you were still trying to do your best to comply with the law. And under the Boric administration, there was they attempt, or at least they did a process to register all the people that had entered irregularly to the country, and the authorities at the time said that with a work contract, they will open hypothetically, because it was not clear at when they create this empadronamiento, they call it, that they were going to give a pass to immigrants, so at the end they never did, and it's unlikely that the new administration would do it. But having a work contract, having a family in Chile would be something to consider when they were looking at to regularize them. So yeah, I think so. There is some exploitation, but it's also some. Not all employers are abuse or try to abuse migrants. So then, with the increase in restrictive immigration regimes eroding immigrants' prior labor market integration in Chile, how have informal labor markets been impacted, and what are the future policy and social implications? Well, I would say there are what really changed and also had an impact and effect on the policies, and I think many of the reasons why the policies became so restrictive was that the public opinion changed regarding immigration. At the beginning, I would say before 2019, Chileans were in generally they were in favor of migrants. At 2018, there were like the number of migrants that were living in Chile was a little bit it was smaller, and I would say the people did not have they were indifferent to immigrants in general, and that indifference translated into the possibility for politicians to do more things in the shadows, you could say. But when the issue became politicized, the authorities in power did not want to create a new avenue for criticism, and they started to use immigration as a topic to show that they were tough on crime, that they were really concerned about, and also immigration became tied to crime, even though there is this is more like a perception than a reality. But all of these changes in circumstances really eroded public opinion, the public perception about immigrants, and it became very unpopular for authorities in power to agree or to implement any sort of solution that would, even though that would be the rational solution to the rational thing to do, they were unwilling to. Even you can say a left government like Boric administration could not or did not follow through on their promise to do an amnesty or a general regularization. So it's interesting to see like the result of like even in the most progressive government that could have made a big difference, they were not able to do anything. In fact, it's the other way. Like in the previous administration, deportation decisions increased. Not, I would say, not rates in the workplace, but the public opinion was very negative, and this comes to the question of with the increased number of immigrants working in informal labor markets, and also in Santiago, we are speaking in some regions of the country, you don't see the concentration of immigrants is a little bit different. Like, for example, in the northern regions, we're speaking about 15 to 20% of immigrants population compared to Chileans. In Santiago, it's 8%. In other regions, could still be 3 to 4%. But when you see, or at least the general Chileans that started to see immigrants much more often, they started to feel threatened by in their work. Also, they started to complain that they were using the health service, the education, even though those most of it is more perception than I would say a reality so far, because usually migrants are doing the works and the jobs that Chileans do not want to do. So I don't see a direct competition happening, but in the perception, in the world of perception and symbolics, I think it has changed the way people, and I will give you, it changed the way people perceive immigrants, but perceive them in the abstract. Because when you ask them, there are some surveys that ask them in your interpersonal relationship, how would you, how well or how bad do you feel? Do you have experiences, like bad experiences, interacting with a person, a foreign-born person? And usually the responses are positive, like they don't have bad experiences. But in the abstract, in general terms, they don't like that. Yes.
I was wondering if you could kind of like return to this like issue of what do you think explains the administration's kind of inability or unwillingness to grant amnesty? Like, is that effectively like representative of them kind of catering to the right and saying, well, we don't want to offer the far right who are now in power an opportunity to kind of castigate us as like inviting these hordes of Venezuelans into the country, and we're all criminals, right? Like, is this the kind of progressive left, like catering in a sense? Like,
I would say for the authorities in power now, authorize, like going through an amnesty, general amnesty, they see it as a way of what they call calling, like becoming more attractive. So they sending the message that Chile will forget anyone that came, similar like the discussion that was happening here about like why are we going to forgive someone that came to the US without respecting our laws, right? So these people came clandestine entrance, and now even overstayers, that they remain in the country or they enter the country without respecting the laws that were in place. So we cannot forgive them, and that would send like a wrong message to future prospective migrants that will see Chile as like, let's come to Chile, let's take advantage of their system, of the healthcare or the educational system. And so, but the problem is that like there's no empirical proof that actually if you are more lenient, or if you give migrants more rights, then they will call, because that assumes that migrants are rational actors, that when they make the decision to migrate, they weigh the cost and benefits of their action. And usually the decision to migrate is very spontaneous in some ways, depending on your conditions and your country. Like you, of course, if you look at, like in this research, we looked at permanent residents and legal and temporary residents, and their story to migrate was very different, because they had time to plan. Like they had time to like save money, to buy a plane ticket, to organize, like to have the paperwork they required to then, like there's university, their college certificates, everything, so they could then come to Chile, and immigration was very, like the immigrants, their trajectory was very like easy. But usually the migrants that are forced, that are migrating because of economic conditions or political crisis in their country, they don't have the time to plan. They just take the bus. And so for them, if they see Chile is having amnesty, I don't think it would change the fact that they decided they need to live, and they are starting to look where we can live. And I would say like their family networks makes a lot of like difference, because they can. Chile is not a country that is so close as well. It's not a country where the weather is that nice, so it's not that easy to like just decide, oh, I want to go to the end of the world. You need to have someone that can receive you at some point. And I would say that there are like networks that have been like building up over time. That can explain more than I would say like the effect of the message of Chile being welcoming. And what we find in this second, like we did with Assad, we did an experiment. And we first started, we created a survey of labor market integration that we conducted in-person survey to 1,500 migrants in Chile in different regions. And within the survey, we incorporated an experiment with two vignettes. Vignettes are like hypothetical scenarios where we invented like a negative condition saying the immigration law is being changed. There will be more detention center for immigrants. We are going to, like, if you do whatever you do, it doesn't matter if it's small or not, but you will be deported if you are caught. And we will be very tough on, like, the sanctions are going to be very tough for migrants that are unable to live in peace with each other. That was a negative scenario. And then we had like a positive scenario that emphasizes that as a country, we want immigrants to regularize, we are going to facilitate conflicts, neighborhood conflicts that you might have. We respect immigrants' rights and all. And then we have a no story, a control story. And then we ask them 4 questions. After hearing this story, how likely would you make a claim to the labor office if you don't get paid at your work? How likely would you go to a hospital if you have an accident at work? How likely would you look for a new job? And then a 4th question that was, how afraid are you of being deported? Okay, and we changed it. All the vignettes were randomly assigned to the different survey respondents, and also the questions were randomly assigned. And we find that people that were in the positive condition, like with the just knowing, because this is not something that happened in reality, but just knowing that the law would be favoring regularization, recognizing their rights, they were more willing to claim. If they were not being paid, they were more willing to go to a hospital when they had, and they were more likely to look for a new job, as opposed to the negative conditions. So what that tells you is that restrictive regimes at the end can backfire. Instead of keeping people out of your country, you are making the people that are in the country less available to participate, to be part of the society, to also use the resources, which can produce very negative results in terms of integration, but also for Chileans in general. And I would say, there is a question here about the US. I would say in the US you see a similar effect of this, even a worse effect by like racialization, the heightened enforcement with plus the racialization that exists here really makes immigrants afraid of speaking out, but also using like public institutions. And it's not just immigrants, first-generation immigrants, because these are only first-generation, even like citizens that have family or know immigrants that are more threatened by this, they still feel in a similar way. And in Chile, we are not the same, like it's not that bad, I would say, as it is in the US. But still, in this experiment, it was interesting, and our motivation to do it was, how would these frames work in a country that has weak enforcement, and we find very strong results. Even and I would say, even like just the silence of a message really produces changes in behavior. Even we don't know, because this is a survey that was conducted at a certain period of time. We don't know how much the effect will last. Probably maybe the day after they forgot what they responded. But just like hearing that message at that moment, a 2-minute hypothetical scenario, so that makes you think about politicians like all the time, like bringing this up in different like social media and building up this restrictive position toward migrants, and then you think, okay, you want neighbor, what is, I would say, most negative is that migrants stop helping the police. For example, if you want to build a safe neighborhood, you want people to be talking to the police, participating in, and you don't want them to be afraid or not willing to participate in any sort of social activity. So I would say race. There is one question about race that I think with this group and with Colombians, I would say Chileans are similar than in the US. They are racist here, but what is different from us is that the effects of race were more prominent with Haitian migrants than with Colombian, a few Venezuelans. Most of our migration is from neighboring countries, so we all speak in Spanish, so that makes everything easier. We come from a similar Christian background as well. And I would say for young kids, the integration is harder, not because of their language or of their culture, but because most of their journey was very traumatic, and also they lack several years of education, so they have a hard time adapting to the school system. And I would say in the last 2 years there are more instances of discrimination, especially like hearing the accents. People started, like, I have stories of people that Venezuelans that were married to Chileans, and they went to the health the community health center, and they asked the husbands to do the talking because they did not, like, as in Facebook, like looking at this Venezuelan, you could not tell if they were Chileans or Venezuelans. You could not tell the difference. But when they started to speak, then the public officer immediately identified them, and so they sent like the husbands to do the talking. You could see that a little bit more. But when we asked them about discrimination, it did not come, or at least maybe as like a methodological limitation. They did not. In these interviews, we had like 1 hour. They were 1 hour long interviews, so we had time to like really discuss, and we asked a lot about. We did not speak about discrimination because we did not want to prime the subjects about speaking it. So we only asked, have you had any sort of misunderstanding or awkward moment at your work that you would like to comment on? And we did not get many, like there were like just a few that spoke about most of these of our interviewees worked in places where there were a lot of immigrants as well. So I would say maybe discrimination is something that we found more in like high-skilled migrants that were in like mostly Chilean companies, but for like the majority of our subjects, they did not experience it in the workplace. Maybe when they are outside, like when they're walking, a little bit, but especially in the health system, some of them experienced by hearing the accent. Yes.
Yeah, follow up on that. So I know that Chile at some point, I think it's the late 10s to like it was the largest migration destination of Haitian migrants, right, from South Latin America. I was wondering if there's kind of an indirect effect. And I don't know the real context, so tell me, in terms of like the public opinion about migration, which affected the law, which has to do with the Asian migration? Or you think it's more about Venezuela, like, so that there could be a racism effect that affects the law, and then affects the other people who are not Black necessarily, but they kind of just get it gets like all immigrants, right? So
Yeah, I would say Asian migrants are very, like, they're hidden. Like, nobody thinks when they think about immigration, I think they think about Latin American immigrants. Most migrants from Asia
from Haiti, Haiti.
Haiti.
Yeah.
Yes. No. But many of them left. But I would say was.
But was the law affected through the discussion about the Haitian?
Not that much. I would say Venezuela. I would say the link between crime and migration was the stronger link that justified the restrictions, and I would say that came mostly from Venezuelans and like drug cartels and when I did some research also at the border in Chile and Venezuelans and Colombians were at the interviewing like prosecutors and defendants. They were like, these are like very empowered migrants because compared to Bolivians and Peruvians who were like represented as docile and like following the rules or maybe like less educated. Like Venezuelans, they were very empowered. They talk louder, but also they made claims more. If they were not satisfied with the service they were receiving, they had no problem talking about it. So, and some of them were tied to criminal activity, even though it was not clear. Like the week that I was at the border with Bolivia and Chile, I saw a lot of people crossing the border. Like they crossed. Well, I did not see them, but there was a place where the military forces, they detained them and they brought to this place. And I didn't see men. I only see women and children trying to cross. And also when there is also the possibility to leave, to voluntarily leave if you enter like irregularly. And I saw that also at the airport. And again, there were no men that were leaving. It was like women trying, and the procedure is very easy, at least in Chile. That's like the other side of the story, that also in terms of enforcement and border criminology, you could say, is not as punitive as it would be here. We don't have detention center yet. And the investigation police who is in charge of like the deportation of people, they are the ones to follow up procedure. But for them, at least from my interviews with them, it's more about like paperwork than it is about like sanctioning them or like detaining them. But still, like the overall picture is, I agree with, we believe with Assad that is a restrictive regime is becoming, particularly with the prohibition to adjust status while in the country, which changed like a tradition, a South American tradition that was very much embedded in the legislations of many countries. I think in all the countries in South America, you can just come as a tourist and then you can adjust while in the country with a work contract. Today, it's not possible because they wanted to increase control over people. They wanted to emulate the United States. That's this. The idea of having people abroad is that you can check their like criminal records. You can check the kinds of work they're going to do, but it doesn't. There is no. It's not a law that was made with it thinking about what's the reality of South America, of people coming and then deciding what to do. You can still adjust if you get married to a Chilean or if you sign a civil, like a partnership. And I think we are going to start looking at increase in partnerships, civil partnerships. because I would do that, or I might advise a person to do that instead of, because, or like exiting and then re-entering, because these processes are not taking 2 months, they're taking years. So it doesn't, it's not like the law is working at a different level than what reality requires. And the consequence is that people are living, are falling into irregularity, which with all the consequences in terms of what options they have to like change work and get promoted. Like all of our interviewees, the promotion was not something that was in their, they had more responsibility, but it did not come with an increased salary or anything. Yeah, what time should I finish? I can continue, I don't mind.
I mean, we are just on time, we have 5 more minutes. Do you
Okay.
have other questions? Yeah.
Yes. The second generation. That's an interesting question because we don't. This I would say we have the newer. Well, fertility rates are in Chile are going down, and I would say immigrants are helping in reducing that decrease. So we are the countries having like immigrants are having children, especially when migrants are just arrived. They don't have the conditions to have children, but as they've been in Chile for longer periods of time, they start their family. And but so we don't. There is. There in the Migra, which is the network of studies that I work with, like sociologists, economists, and demographers, there is one person, Alejandra Bufele, who is investigating sequential in terms of educational results. And what we see is that usually, but they are like below 18 years of age. We don't have data for like older second generations. And I would say 1.5 generations because they're not born necessarily in Chile, they arrive when they were kids. The main problem they face is that if their parents arrive without border inspection, in Chile, children cannot be sanctioned because of their parents' actions. So they are allowed to have legal status. The thing is that parents are afraid of applying for the kids because when the immigration service asks for proof of income, they don't have, like they have to submit a contract or something that proves that they have enough funds to raise these kids. And they decide not to do it just because they're afraid that they are going to get caught and they're going to be deported. And the problem is that for children to get a visa is very easy. The only requirement is to be enrolled in an educational school, in an education institution. The problem is that when they turn 18 is when it becomes very complicated. Because you could be as a student for 2 years and then apply to permanent resident, and then you are like in the green area. Like you should be like, okay. The problem is if they don't apply before you are 18, then when you want to like regularize later, that will be impossible because you are considered irregular, and then you cannot, you have to exit the country and then re-enter with a temporary visa, which is not something that will happen because these second generation immigrants have been raised in the educational system in Chile. And another thing we have been finding is that most second generation migrants are doing very well at school, but in Chile you can choose if you want like the college, like the humanistic path to go to college or the technical. And migrants are taking more the technical one. We don't know why yet, and we believe it's because they can work, like they can start working faster and they can help their families, as opposed to they have the skills and to go to the humanistic college route, and they could also apply to like free tuition in Chile because if once they get the permanent residence, they can compete with Chileans in the same way. but they're taking the technical more because I guess, but I don't know. This is it's a hypothesis. And another thing that we're seeing is that women are dropping out from school more than men because they're taking care of the kids at home instead of going to the school. That's what we are finding for like 1.5 generation. But yeah, if I would say legal status really like my first, if what I would try to do for sure is to regularize all students and to make sure that when they turn 18 that they have permanent residence so they don't fall into the same precarious conditions that the parents or the adults. That would be the safest bet, but first, and people politically speaking are not as opposed to children, but for some reason the immigration agency is not taking those steps to like regularize all the kids, even though the law says specifically that kids cannot be sanctioned. So you cannot, even though like, for example, if a mother tries to cross irregularly with their kids, they are going to open a deportation process against the mother, but not against the kids. So they usually, what they were saying at the border, the police officers that I interview, is that they are using kids, or at least that's what the police officers believe, that they are using the kids to like be force the police officers to take the persons and keep them inside the country instead of sending them back to Bolivia or to Peru, where if they are caught within 10 kilometers of the border.
Well, thank you, but we have some people in the room, but there are questions as comments I can share with you after, including Hector Hoyos is in the airport Miami listening to your presentation. But thank you for your insights, thank you for sharing your work. Analyses between the here and